have Ted Simpson, director of the film, and Finbar O'Sullivan, who produced it. We've got Fraser Stewart, who's one of the many contributors, Roisin Hyde, and of course Mike Robinson. I'm going to welcome them all to the panel now, so we can have a good conversation. And I just feel that the next half hour is going to be just jam packed with so many contributions. But maybe. Mike, can I come to you first? Because you made such a powerful start to the film itself, and obviously the leadership. Particularly you personally, shown at the start of this process, which was so beautifully drawn out. I just wonder what your feeling is now. I'm sure there was a bit of a tension about taking stock, but not taking the eye off the sort of ambition and the scale of the challenge ahead. Do you think the sort of leadership direction now is going to be quite different, and where do you think you are in that, and maybe give us a bit of a flavour of that going forward?
Thanks, Barry. Yeah, difficult one, isn't it? I think the most important thing is that my sense is very, very straightforward. I guess we're all on a journey. None of us has done enough, but if we don't stop and actually recognize that we have actually made some progress, I think it just starts to get it's just too difficult, a sort of stretch to keep yourself motivated and keep yourself going. And so I think there's a really important psychological element to this, is just trying to understand, did it make a difference? Has it made a difference? Where are we at the moment? And therefore, yeah, we're not at the end of that journey. We've got a long way to go. So to answer your question, I mean, I think the First Minister suggests we're halfway there. I would slightly argue with that. I'd say we're maybe a quarter to a third of the way there, because apart from anything else, we've got to go beyond net zero anyway. But equally, we need to know that we are making progress. There is a slight concern I have sometimes at the narrative, is that nothing's good enough. And yeah, we haven't got where we need to be, but you've got to also look at the positives and recognise them. So for me, the critical thing, the nature of leadership has changed. We need everybody to play a role in a different sort of way. I think one of the things I often ask, more than anything else in this debate, I ask for permission to change from people, because I think there is a sort of natural, reticence about change. And I think we've got to take the fear out of change, and everybody's got to play a part in that. Everybody's got to help with that, because we know what we need to do, but in large part, there's certain areas where we're clearly not doing it, and we need more people to stand up and speak up for the right things in order to make that change come about.
Thanks, Mike. Roisin, if we could come to you, obviously the session, the film for you was absolutely about innovation, but I suppose I was sort of struck by, the sort of capitalist model, of course, in there is how do we share good practice, but at the same time, I guess what you came up against was presumably organisations who want to maintain a competitive advantage. I just wonder, if you could give us more of an insight, and perhaps even in the construction sector, which obviously you know intimately, how you feel will overcome some of those barriers.
Well, I think things have changed a lot. So I've been doing this PhD for 5 years now, just finishing up. And years before that, I was a practicing architect, a site architect, which is kind of why I wanted to kind of get into developing, high performance, low carbon materials. It always felt a bit niche. And I would say over the last 5 years, I feel now that I'm more kind of, at the center of things. There's a great appetite, kind of simple kind of things like the government put into contracts now 30% savings on CO2 emissions relating to concrete, because we know it can be achieved. And, that's become part of the contracts now for public funded projects. So that means that suddenly, everyone is scrambling to kind of, see how they can deliver on those savings. And there's a great appetite by the construction industry now to kind of make that transition. There's probably there is support out there. I mean, I've been funded by Innovate UK for this project we're working on at the moment, but it is challenging for kind of big, huge concrete companies that have a very established supply chain. They tend to have their own quarries. They have plant that costs several million or maybe tens of millions. They have trained staff, and this change is going to be quite different. And there is support, but they're still struggling to kind of make that transition. And, it's like trying to turn a huge ship that's going in the wrong direction, just kind of away from the iceberg or something, So I feel like the will is there, and people are putting strategies and support in place, but the ship has been going a different direction for the last 50, 60 years, and we're only just beginning to kind of be aware of the risk of this and to move. So it's happening, but slowly. That's my experience.
Thanks, Roisin, and good luck with the rest of the PhD. I'm sure there's a
Thank you.
horizon for you there it's looking very, very attractive. Fraser, can I come to you next? Really powerful intervention, I think, in the film, and it looking at it as a film, a kind of real pivot at that moment in the film, when I think you got to the heart of some of the real challenges here that, actually, for some people, their contribution is incredibly low, but then they could be really, really impacted by it. But I was struck by, I think, something which you certainly reached me, something about language and how we speak to communities. And I think for me, there's something about speaking at, but you have to get alongside communities. There's massive challenges there, and I see a question coming in there from Scan there talking about local developments. So maybe some of your thoughts and reflections on how that can be done well. Yeah, you know what you're talking about, Fraser. I'm sure you've got lots to talk about there.
Yeah, we could do this all night if you wanted to. I saw the question coming from Scan there just now as well, and I wanted to pick up on it. So I think that's crucial, and I don't think it's just language. What's important to clarify is that when we say language in the narrative that we use, lots of extremely smart people have been working on this kind of stuff in climate movements around the world for years and years and decades now. But when we're talking at this sort of critical stage where we've yet to reach that, well, we're kind of on the cusp of the mass of people that we need to get us over the line. We saw it at COP26. Another question that came in was COP a success? If you take it as COP26 in the building versus COP26 in the street, I would say one of them certainly was, and it was the one in the street, because it is cutting through a little bit more than it was. But in terms of the role of communities, I think they have an important role to play in that, because one, obviously they're on the ground in those communities. They know what makes people tick. They know what people are after, or certainly at least they know how to communicate, receive information, and work collaboratively at a local scale to get things done. For me, the community level is crucial. I work with a number of different community groups out and around Glasgow, up in the northeast a little bit as well, with NESCAN and stuff, doing a little bit of steering on those committees. And a big part of the sort of why communities are so critical, even though a lot of the time it can feel really small versus the massive scale stuff that we need to do, is because communities create spaces where people can come and share concerns and thoughts in kind of a comfortable environment with people that they know. When you have communities, trusted people, trusted voices in those communities having those conversations, they're much more authentic. And I think authenticity and sincerity are key to mobilizing that sort of number of people that we need. And I don't think there's anywhere better than community level space to make that happen. So I think absolutely local level is critical to this, even when it feels like the problem is so enormous. It has to start at least in some degree at the local level.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean that we feel it really, I think, very keenly within Keep Scotland Beautiful. How do we reach and support communities from where they are not, imposing something from, wherever our offices are based. And how you say develop trust. Seems to be the basis of all good community work, and that's certainly been my career. Is just because you've got a good shiny thing doesn't mean to say it'll work absolutely everywhere. So it's a really, really interesting area. Can maybe come back now to Ted and Finn in terms of the actual film itself. I mean, I guess one of the challenges, and I think you maybe touched on it at the start, right at the start of the film, in fact, was that wealth of information and content. I mean, how did you pull that together? And maybe Mike, you want to come in this as well in terms of distilling down how you'd actually make it flow as a story, if you will. If you could give us some insight, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting challenge, because with this film we sort of started in one place and then ended up a few months later just constantly uncovering more and more things as we were making it, which is sort of slightly bad film practice in a way, because you want to have a cap on when to stop filming. But there's just so much going on across Scotland and so many storylines that we thought were really important to represent in the film, that actually there's quite a few scenes that ended up on the cutting room floor, so to speak, that we just didn't have space for. But I think that's a really great place to start for a film like this, because there was just so much wealth of material to explore, and it was all about paring it back and finding a narrative that felt like we covered all the bases, but also kind of, you know, it wasn't just success story after success story as well. It was balanced in the work that still needs to be done, which I think was kind of that balance that Finn and I were really trying to push for. Don't know if you want to jump in on that, Finn, as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're kind of bang on there. The great thing about making this film was the fact that there was 100 different stories that we could have gone in and told. You know, for every Huntley, there's 10 more communities around Scotland doing equally amazing things for themselves and to kind of help radiate out that climate message into the wider community, which is amazing. And there's people doing awesome stuff all over the place. So distilling it down and creating a narrative that was watchable was really important to us, something that people could engage with but not be like overloaded. And I think we managed to kind of hit that balance, if I don't say so myself, of touching all of the different industries and areas, as well as, you know, not shying away from the industry areas that are perhaps slower on the uptake. And that maybe need a nudge. And I think, you know, we've certainly scratched the surface on those things, but it was super encouraging going around Scotland to realise how many people are committed to the change and how many people are committed to doing something, anything, whether it's at a community level or the top of industry. So yeah, I mean, geez, we scratched the surface, but the work goes on, right?
I think you're still muted, Barry.
You're muted, Barry.
So it's only been nearly 2 years. Mike, have you got anything to add there? Because obviously, in terms of the engagement in the film, you know, your contribution was significant. You know, you a sense of what stories you felt were useful and important to gather.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think the guys did a fantastic job, a beautiful job of telling the story. And for me, one of the key stories there is, having been involved in this space for a long time, there's a frustration, of course, that people aren't listening to the science and they're not responding to the science, and why haven't things moved forward sufficiently? And it's because the science alone isn't enough. You know, the danger in the early days was that scientists were getting more and more frustrated, having first highlighted climate change probably back in 1979, you know, fairly convincingly, and then spent the next 20 years trying to persuade anybody that they weren't lying. And so there was a real frustration, and what they were doing was just speaking louder and louder and louder to that. And actually the intervention that made a difference was that engagement, that massive engagement with people on the ground. And a lot of people were really concerned and came forwards and collaborated around a single cohesive vision. And what that did was it created the political space for politicians then to go and do what we needed them to do. And the reason the likes of COP struggles is because political leaders don't have that freedom. They don't have that permission. In some cases, they don't have that inclination either. But what we've got to get better at is creating a political pressure and, you know, space for that to happen, for the things that we need to do to move forwards. And so actually, for me, that was a really big part of the story. It was a big part of the story is just about what you can do through activism and what does actually work, and that it isn't, you know, it's not without fruits. Yes, it's frustrating and it's slow and it feels like you're pushing a boulder up a hill most days, but there are wins in the process. But actually that issue, to answering that question about, to some degree, about what communities can do, we desperately need communities to prove that we can do these changes, that these things can work at scale that then can be rolled out and grown. So I think communities got a huge role here in terms of proving there's an appetite, proving that these things can work, and helping to force the needle on all of this.
Thanks, Mike. Just trying to pick up a few questions with the time we've got, and I'm going to gratuitously pick on you, Fraser, since COP was in the city where you live, I think. So there's just that question, you know, was COP a success? Should we maybe start with you, Fraser, and then Roisin, maybe you could go next?
Yeah. So I think this is, after COP, I had about a month just horizontal in a dark room trying to work out the answer to that question, and I don't know that I'm any further forward. But I think what I mentioned in the last answer was, I don't think we can take COP as a singular thing. There was COP inside the building, which is very, very different to the COP outside the building. my experience is that inside the building, we know, right, and I don't mean to be a downer in any sort of sense yet, but we know that it didn't go far enough on a lot of the stuff that we needed to do. Some good stuff in there, some important stuff in there, don't get me wrong. And we were talking about things that hadn't had an awful lot of attention previously at previous COPs. So in that sense, it felt like there was a bit more of a push, but it also, anyone who's done COPs in the past, I think it felt quite similar. It felt sort of business as usual. Out on the street though, at least again, the impression that I got, I spent a lot of time out at activist events. I spent a lot of time at community events, doing little demonstrations, local projects and stuff like that. And that felt much more lively than it had done before. It felt much more that people were tuned into it a little bit. Now, I think there was a big issue in terms of the organisation, right, having COP26 in Glasgow, you know, the sort of that kind of radical working class heritage. It was the perfect place to reach out to schemes and people everywhere and bring everyone into the conversation. I felt like we didn't hit the nail on that in the planning of it, in terms of who was invited, in terms of all the stuff that went on with transport in the city and the run up to it, all that kind of stuff. That felt that it missed the mark in the organisation. Who you want to blame for that is entirely open. But despite that, almost, it felt like still public opinion shifted. I was on various marches, various events where, you know, Indigenous people from West Papua on one side and then a wee women's group from the east of Glasgow on the other. There was a breadth of people that I hadn't seen at climate stuff in Scotland generally before in the last 4 or 5 years that I've been kind of deeper into it. So I think on the street, I think a lot of the activism worked. I think people's ears pricked up a little bit having it local. The question is whether we have the kind of lasting legacy that we were hoping for. It looks promising, it's still working, but that's whether or not that's a success. That side of it is for us to get the boots on and get out and make sure that it is, I think.
Thanks, Fraser. Roisin, you know, that sense of, you know, COP potentially being a stage for innovation as much as it was, you know, some of the detail, did you feel there was an opportunity for that, even within your sector?
Unfortunately, it didn't deliver on what we had hoped to get from it. So we were supposed to be taking part, I think almost 5,000 organisations applied to be in the exhibition space, which was beside the Science Centre. And I think they selected about 40 or 50. You know, and we all kind of moved forward, and over the kind of months leading up to COP, you know, people just dropped out one by one because we weren't being given information about where things were supposed to be located, you know, services, facilities. You know, I mean, Fraser's more diplomatic than me. I can name the individuals, you know, and they're on my list forever. It was very disappointing. I mean, you know, there was a group of maybe between 5 and 10 people that could have just got their act together. You know, they were very hands off, not my fault, you know. And yes, it was their fault. So, I mean, we got moved 22 times in that period. The last move was about 2 weeks before the event, and it just wasn't possible to do it safely in that time frame. And we told them that. So that's why we had to drop out. So it was a huge disappointment, I would say. You know, particularly, I mean, the construction industry really embraced COP. You know, we've been talking about it going back 2-3 years. There were huge plans from, you know, my industry partner was Balfour Beatty. They had huge plans for COP. You know, wonderful things were going to happen. Lots of technologies would have been demonstrated, which would have been great for people to actually be able to engage with those technologies and understand more. The idea was to have these kind of business networking events so that, you know, we could be there with the technologies, explain them. I mean, these kind of events are great online, but there's nothing kind of, you know, as a substitute for kind of a group of people getting together and just being able to talk through stuff and kind of get a feel for each other and, you know, the thing they're talking about. And so none of that happened, which was kind of disappointing. I feel, you know, my sector, I mean, the construction industry, we consume 40% of raw materials, we generate 40% of CO2 emissions, and we generate 40% of waste. So, you know, the kind of the spotlight should be on us. You know, this is critical now. We have to focus on the industries. Like fossil fuel is definitely number one, but construction is number two. And within that, concrete is very high up the list. So I felt, you know, the construction industry were there. We were kind of, you know, all had ideas and had worked very hard over years to kind of, you know, kind of make the event a success. And then, you know, the organisers did let us down. So it was disappointing. But I mean, there'll be future COPs, you know, at least that energy is there. A lot of networking happened. outside the event, but the event definitely didn't deliver for us.
Mike, can I come to you? It's a question in the chat box. I'm sure you've seen it, just about how we speed up the snail. I love that contribution for the young person on the Lithgow and that analogy. So I don't know if I'm stretching it too much to say how do we speed up the snail, or how do we turn into a faster animal. But your sense of really where do we need to go next with these ambitions for the interim target, but indeed the 2045 targets.
There's lots of answers to that, Barry. The first is together. We need to work more cohesively and collaboratively, because if we're not all pulling in the same direction, then with the best will in the world, we're pulling apart, and we really, really can't afford that. Issues like cement. I mean, Roisin's project absolutely should have gone ahead. It's a crime that didn't really proceed. It's 7-8% of global emissions, cement, and here's somebody trying to develop solutions that are using significantly less carbon than Portland cement, and that's just not the space wasn't there because of just pure bloody disorganization, to be brutally honest. So that was hugely frustrating. But in terms of speeding this up, I think we're starting to see that. Somebody asked why the finance sector wasn't in the film. I think that was what the suggestion was, and the reason is because they're not ahead of the curve. They're incredibly conservative. I remember running a meeting with Alan Caldwell years ago that he coordinated in Comrie, and we brought together a bunch of pension funds. And the problem we had was, that what they wanted to deal with was too big for communities. They wouldn't touch any project less than 20 million. And between us, we didn't have projects worth 20 million. So that was a real obstacle. But the other thing was they were incredibly conservative. And when I say conservative, they didn't want to invest in onshore wind with a 25-year guaranteed feed-in tariff because they saw that as too high risk. So the prospect of them investing in tidal energy it was absolutely off the scale, never going to happen, because it was just crazy high risk for them. I think the difference that's changed in that with finance particularly is it's become so uncertain that business and industry and finance now need more guidance as to what are the technologies of the future, what are the industries of the future that actually have a sustainable future, can actually be invested in. And that's a role for all of us. And one of the roles there is government. They've got to give certainty over the long term to some of those industries. Otherwise, nobody's going to invest in them. You can't expect a business to do a volte face in terms of what it wants to do if it doesn't think that industry is going to last more than 4 or 5 years. So there's got to be certainty, which is why removing incentives that are brought forward quickly and suddenly is really, really deeply unhelpful. We know most of the things we need to do. We just have to get on with it. And I'd like to think that the things that are going to make the difference, joined up demanding change from your politicians, but creating that space at the local level. That's absolutely critical. Politicians aren't brave. Brave politicians are usually ex-politicians. So the more you can convince them that by coming and agreeing with you, they're going to win more votes, the more you're going to win. But the other two big changes, I think we are going to see a big shift in the finance sector. They've been very slow to the table. But one of the biggest changes after COP was a change in the way finance viewed life. And I've heard there's 9 trillion of disinvested funds on the international market looking for a home. Nobody knows where to put disinvestment. They know what to withdraw from, but they're not sure where to then invest it to sort of build the future. And I think the other thing that's on the horizon, I think it's really important, is legislative change at various levels. But one of the ones I'm really excited by, we did a lot of work with during COP, is the Stop Ecocide campaign, which is actually a group of international lawyers trying to get an international law in the Court of Human Rights that sits alongside genocide and recognizes environmental destruction as a singular affront to humanity. And the reason that's important is that for years, businesses have been able to ignore pollution, ignore legislation, or not necessarily ignore legislation, but it's not legislated for. They've been able to destroy the environment and someone else has to pay for it. Someone else has to clean it up. I think those days are changing, and between the changes in potential litigation, through legislation, through narrowing down of what is actually possible, and through new finance streams, I think we will see change. But the way you judge a government's commitment, I do believe thoroughly, is you look at their budgets. So if you want to address this properly, if you want to compare it with COVID, they need to invest in it. They need to put the money behind it, because it ain't going to appear otherwise.
Thanks, Mike. Ted, Finn, if I could just come to you, I feel we'll just get going, but unfortunately our time's really against us. Maybe just as filmmakers, which is probably the unique role you've got here in this call, was there something unexpected that you could tell us about the film and the process of making that you could share with us?
Unexpected. I think we learned a lot making the film. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to sort of absorb all of the things that Mike's been saying and everyone else has been saying. It's been really interesting contributions, but I think the overall feeling of action, I think, was something that we were surprised by when having completed the project. Going in, we kind of knew of the progress that had been made, and we kind of knew the key areas, challenges that we wanted to explore. But I think we came away with a feeling of momentum, to be honest, that I was potentially not really expecting to find. And I think that was probably one of the most encouraging things that gave us a lot of energy in making the film. Actually, it gave us the energy to sort of finish it and feel like it was an important message to share, because I think the biggest concern a lot of people who are very involved in these spaces have is that talking about positive action will lead to sort of apathy, and people think, oh, someone else is sorting it, it's fine. And they need to impress upon the idea that things are actually really bad. But I think just that feeling of momentum that we got from talking to these people from across the country was quite encouraging.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, mate. I think, coming into the film personally, when all you hear about climate change is from, mainstream news articles and people telling you how bad things are and how terrible it's going to be and it's going to get worse, coming into that with that sort of view of, well, what can I really do to help? Meeting the people that we met at all different levels who have this unbelievable optimism, and not even that coupled with hard work and plans and hope, was incredibly inspiring. And I don't know whether it's the fact that we haven't done this same exercise in England or in Wales. We spend a lot of time making films in Scotland, but I feel like that is something that is unique to Scotland. The community spirit, the momentum that they can build by coming together of their own free will without anyone kind of pushing them to do so, to demand and make change, was nothing short of inspiring. It was something really cool to see. And like I said in the last answer, we met a handful of people, and we know hundreds more stories around the country where people are doing that and more. So yeah, I mean, that certainly took me by surprise, and definitely took away some of my own cynicism, and made me believe that maybe people can do something. If the government's not going to play ball, then maybe we can start it from the ground up and get together and actually make change and push that forward and demand it. So yeah, unexpected, but pleasant.
Yeah, I think it provides quite a lot of agency, to be honest, just in that sense of like, you can occupy a position of understanding that there's so much work to do. There is so many issues that we still have to face, especially, I think, one thing I think as filmmakers we're very interested in is the justice angle of these issues, and how many conflicts are going to arise from us solving this crisis. But you can also take the empowerment that how much travel we've done in the last 10 years or so, as long as Mike's been at the tiller of the various organizations that he's been at. That's one individual you can use as an example that has pushed through massive amount of change and made a lot of space, I think, for action to happen. And I think that's still very much happening on an increasing scale in Scotland. And that's, it's a good place to be, I think.
Well, I think that really powerful and positive note is a great place to finish the conversation. But just briefly, Ted and Finn, if other people want to, I'm sure people on the call are going to try and encourage other people to see the film. Is there another way in which they can see the film?
Yes, you can. You can get in touch with Rachel at Keep Scotland Beautiful. I know that you guys are organising a series of kind of screenings and organising kind of different grants and things for community funded screenings, and that's really important for us to get it out to as many people as possible. You can also go to the website. The website is scotlandsclimatejourney.com. Ted, is that right? I got it right. scotlandclimatejourney.com, and you can get in touch with me personally and request a screening, and we can figure out something there. But yeah, as many people as can see it, we'd love that. We want to spread it around as far as possible.
Well, thanks both, and can I just thank a huge thanks to everyone who's joined us tonight. I can feel, just looking at the panelists, there's a bit of frustration we can't continue this conversation, and I feel it too. But Mike, Ted, Roisin, Finn, and Fraser, huge thanks for you joining us tonight and giving your insight and helping us understand your experience of being part of the film, but indeed what it was like putting the film together. We really, really appreciate it and delighted to be able to support other people to see it right across the country. Can I also thank my team, who've made sure that we're here at the right time, at the right place, and behind the scenes are making sure everything works. So Rachel and Rosanna do a fantastic job, and all my colleagues who are behind the scene supporting this activity tonight. Huge thanks to them. But a huge thanks to the audience, and I'm terribly sorry, I'm becoming awful at not being able to try and get all these questions in, but I think that engagement just speaks volumes about what the film is about, which is there is huge engagement, there is huge interest, and there's lots of questions to be answered, and people want to engage, I think, really meaningfully. And as you described it, you know, some of these stories will be difficult, some of these discussions will be difficult to do, but fundamentally as a country, I think we need to have those conversations if we are going to move forward. So thanks for joining us tonight. Just to say that there's a whole number of different other events associated with Scotland's Climate Festival. Please visit our website for further details of those. We've really enjoyed putting them on. We've got one on the 16th of February to do with well-being, so a great topic there, which I think will probably take on some of the issues that potentially, you know, particularly Fraser probably raised in his element of the film as well. But please do sign up to our newsletter and on our social media at KSB Scotland and hashtag Climate Festival Scot. Huge thanks for everyone for being with us here tonight. Enjoy the rest of your night, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.